everybody. It's day 2 of CS2. And yeah, so let's get through these initial slides and then we'll get right into the session everybody's been waiting for. I hope everybody's having a good time. Like we were saying yesterday, it takes a ton of effort to throw these events. We have several hundred people watching online, got a couple hundred people in the room. Mingling around outside as well. So thanks to our sponsors, AvePoint, thanks to Kieri, thanks to us. I'd like to thank us, as well as all the rest of the sponsors as well. I hope everybody's been stopping by the booths outside. It seemed like everybody was having a good time. Okay, agenda. Everybody should be able to have a copy of this, but follows the same time blocks that we had yesterday. We'll only have one set of breakouts in the afternoon, and then for the last session, it'll all be back in here for Scott Edwards' big announcement. And here we go. You guys ready for this? Watch this. That's pretty cool. Hey! Wow, very fancy. Okay, let's talk about the CMMC ecosystem and all yell at the DoD. James, I think you're here to announce that everyone attending gets a CMMC Level 2 waiver.
Absolutely not.
So for those of you who are not aware, James Gillooley from the CMMC PMO office and Matt Travis, the CEO of the Cyber AB, you probably recognize him from the monthly town halls, which you should all be listening to.
Absolutely.
Which is where all the awesome information comes out. So before everybody stops paying attention, we'll get the main thing out of the way. What is the main ecosystem takeaway that the DoD would like to convey to industry?
You've had these requirements since 2017. CMMC is an operational reality. It is not going away. Katie Arrington keeps saying it. Mr. McEwen keeps saying it. The DoD keeps saying it. It's not going away. The administration is not going to kill it no matter how many EOs they put out. So be prepared, implement 171, and get your assessments as soon as possible. And don't count on a self-assessment.
There you go, cut and dry. And then Matt, we'll do the same thing. What's the main takeaway you would like the AB to convey? Stop blaming you for things that are outside
no,
that
listen,
DoD policy decisions?
We are privileged to have the responsibilities that we have from the DoD, and we need to execute them successfully. So I'm very much looking forward to the next panel. There's a gap in my cap, so I'll be in front row listening for that one. I want to thank the sponsor, Summit 7, all of you here. My message is, to follow up on James said, not that it's not, it's here. CMMC is operational. When the 32 CFR rule went final on 16 December, shortly thereafter, after we got through the initial tranche of authorizing the C3POs for real this time, Level 2 certification assessments are available, are ongoing. Certificates of CMMC status are being issued. So the program is up and running. Now, it's not a mandatory program yet, so that will come with the 48 CFR rule, but for all these years of waiting, CMMC as a program is up and running. So that's point one. And point two, Jacob, I'd say the most important conversation you all need to have within the DIB is the one with your MSP or your MSSP or your CSP, because that is crucial to understanding what they're doing for you, how they're doing it, and what their role is in CMMC. So those are my 2 points.
Great, great. Yeah, special shout out to the chair sponsor. This is the first time I've sat in this chair so far. They are very comfortable. This is great.
They're great.
So whoever that was, thanks for that. All right, so we all know Katie. We all love Katie. Katie's back. It feels a lot like 2019, 2020, where the DoD is now saying things again in true Katie style, we'll say. So of her many recent statements, one of the things that struck me was she said, "Do you think the government isn't watching what you're doing?" And I think this is very interesting because one of the things that we've said over the years is that if the rate of implementation in the ecosystem had gone up organically while we were waiting for CMMC 2.0, then the case for CMMC would be a lot weaker.
Yep.
You could make a case that you don't need these external assessments because people are now implementing requirements they previously weren't aware of. Like we heard from Amy Williams yesterday, like we've seen from various reports over the years, that is not the case. Implementation rates still remain extremely low until they're forced. And so you guys have talked about some of these stories about when people would put in their POAM expiration dates in SPRS, their SPRS scoring, DIBCAC would show up. What are some of the things that the government is seeing when Katie says, "Do you think we don't see what you're doing?"
I mean, we have access to all the assessments. We have a great working relationship with DIBCAC and DCMA. So we get feedback on all the assessments that are happening, you know. So when you put in POAMs that are out to $21.99, that's kind of a red flag. When you get notified by DIBCAC that they're going to come in for an assessment and your SPRS score changes from a perfect 110 to a negative 213, it's kind of a red flag. So if there wasn't so much of that, I think there would, like you said, there wouldn't be as much of a case for the third-party assessments.
Yeah, and this is something you guys have said pretty consistently over the years, that you see this like gaming of the system.
Yep.
Plus the implementation rates.
Yep.
One of the things that we were talking about the other day is obviously the PMO has a good relationship with DIBCAC, and we've heard from DIBCAC at previous CS2s, we've heard from them on the town halls, but the PMO and the DoD also has a good working relationship with the primes.
Yep.
So what kind of information gets flowed back and forth between the DoD and the primes? Because I think a lot of subcontractors maybe feel one step removed, but that's still not a shelter away from some of the antics that are going on, right?
So in the construct of what we call the DIB Sector Coordinating Council, you know, we have this working relationship with not only the primes, but a group of small businesses within the DIB that provide us feedback to all of their supply chain and all of their issues that they face. Feedback, yes.
What constitutes feedback?
You know, issues they're running to, our sub-tiers aren't doing X. They are putting off CMMC. They are waiting for the DoD to provide a free service to meet CMMC requirements, et cetera.
Yeah, so I think that's probably a good explanation of why Katie would say things like, do you think we don't see what's happening? So in case anybody sees or hears Katie saying that, that's a little bit more context behind where that comes from. Speaking about ethics, Matt, let's talk about the code of professional conduct for people in the ecosystem. Everyone's very eager to help out the DIB and provide a lot of services, and I think that eagerness sometimes causes people to overstate things from time to time. So what have you guys seen as the police watchdog governing body of the ecosystem for how that's playing out?
So the COPC, the Code of Professional Conduct, is the centralized, ethics volume that DoD reviews and approves, and that we publish and enforce. And it only has, authority over formal members of the ecosystem, right? So technically, DIB companies are not under the COPC because they're not part of the ecosystem. And right now, with assessments starting, right, our biggest priority is to ensure that when a C3PO is conducting a certification assessment, that conflicts of interest have been disclosed and mitigated where possible and avoided where you can't mitigate them. And so obviously there's that line between you can't assess for certification purposes those that you have advised or consulted or helped implement. And that, I think we've been pounding that into the C3PO cadre for a while. What we're seeing now is, now that CMMC is kind of starting for real, some of the, as you kind of alluded, Jacob, some of the exaggerated marketing claims. Now again, MSPs and CSPs aren't really in the ecosystem. Now sometimes they are owned by the same companies that own C3POs, so in that case we have a link to be able to reach out and kind of use our policing power. Mm-hmm. So for the past 3 years, while everyone was waiting for rulemaking, everyone was kind of all in this together, and now that we're seeing that, okay, the starting gun has gone off, those competitive instincts are more energized now, and so I think you're seeing more, I don't want to say aggressive business tactics, but I think a little bit more assertive business tactics in terms of what people are claiming from an MSP side or a CSP side, or certainly if there's a C3PO that's making exaggerated claims or inappropriate claims about quick and easy certifications, for a low price. Now we haven't seen that yet on the C3PO. So we're starting to get a few complaints, and our role is to see if those are valid complaints and then to investigate and adjudicate them. Also, the use of symbology in our marks. So going back to 2020, when we would be issuing, candidate C3PO badges, RP and RPO badges. Some of those old badges are still no longer valid, but in circulation. So we've got a job to do to police those. We're right now going through the hiring process to hire a full-time compliance officer. and that will be her or his responsibility full time to police it.
Yeah. So that complaint process is up and running, and if people see anything uncouth, if you will, they should let you guys know?
So they should, but our first recommendation is, and again, under kind of the ISO construct, the first action suggested is to contact the party that you think is making a mistake, and to reach out with respect and grace and say, hey, I saw this, or I have a concern about this, and see if you can resolve that with the other party. And if that's unsatisfactory, then within CMMC, we have a complaint process, and it's on our website. Process on the website, complaints@cyberab.org is the email address, and we take each one seriously. Not all are valid. Again, sometimes people are complaining about people or organizations that are outside our scope, but anything within our scope, we process and log, and we report out to the PMO every other week on what's in the complaint log.
Gotcha. How's the ISO cert going for the AB? Because this is a big thing that the CMMC flat earthers out there like to say. They never got their ISO cert.
So first I'll put on my terminology police hat. It is not an ISO cert.
Okay, whoa,
Right?
okay,
Yes.
okay.
So a yellow card there for Jacob. As an accreditation body, so speaking for ourselves, as an accreditation body, we do not get accredited or certified. We get essentially recognized by our peers. And so the ISO 17011 process is one which accreditation bodies have to prove that they are operating in accordance with international standards, and specifically ISO 17011. So the first steps is to join one of the ISO regional bodies, which kind of implements those ISO peer reviews globally. And so here in the United States, we're part of the Inter-American Accreditation Cooperation, or IAAC, which is based in Mexico City. So we are now an associate member. You can go on their website and see us there. And so now the process begins, because you can't be recognized as an accreditation body if you haven't accredited anything. And so we couldn't accredit anyone until the 32 CFR rule, and probably the 48 CFR rule as well. And so we're in the process of finalizing the accreditation scheme, which will be, the foundation is ISO 1720. But on top of that are CMMC specific requirements, and that's what the C3PAO will be required to meet in terms of to maintain their ability to conduct level 2 certification assessments. Authorization is the first step, so that means that they've proven they meet the requirements to be a C3PAO. Accreditation comes next to prove to us that they're discharging those duties through our audit process and what have you. So more to come on that, and then the CAICO is going through their process under ISO 1724, which is the standard for certification bodies that issue certifications for individuals.
And the deadline for that isn't until, what, it's 2 years after the 32 rule came out?
C3POs have 27 months with becoming authorized to get ISO, our accreditation with ISO 1720. We have 2 years to get our ISO 1711 recognition, and then the CAICO 1724 will be due by the end of the year, this year.
Yeah. So anytime you hear people out there being like, they missed all their deadlines and they haven't met their deadlines, shame them, shame them.
No, I think there is and listen, accreditation is kind of an arcane, cottage industry, so I don't expect everyone to know the rules. But the big thing is that you can't be accredited or recognized as an accreditation body until you start doing, proving to show how you do it. So C3POs have not been able to conduct any level 2 certifications until just a couple months ago.
Right.
So we can't accredit them until they start doing them, and then we can't be recognized until people see us how we accredit.
Yeah, from the perspective of the contractors, we're almost 6 months into the to CMMC being live. But from the perspective of the ISO system, we're not even 6 months in. So It's a very long time for people who are waiting, and it's not a very long time at all
and
for
people
you guys.
think that this all started back in 2020. But it didn't really.
Yeah.
Right. Didn't.
Yeah, that's a super fun story. All right, James, when is it going to be in contracts? Just give us a specific date and month, a specific time for the 48. Yeah! If you could just go ahead and commit to a specific day of the week, that would be great.
A specific day's time?
Yeah, it's month, day, week.
So, can't talk about rulemaking. I will say that there are things being worked to move things forward past the executive orders that have frozen all, not just 48, but all federal regulation. So, we're working through the process of trying to get a waiver or some other way to move the 48 forward, but as of right now, it is paused, along with everything in the federal government.
Gotcha. Well, I know Stacy was saying that she still thinks that the summer-fall time frame is realistic. So let me give you our
That's
estimate.
our goal, but
Let me give you our estimate, and you can maybe just signal with your hands or something nonverbal. That way you don't get in trouble. So the traditional length of time from proposed rule to final rule for the DoD, going all the way back to 2009, would place the start of the rule around October of this year. However, the 32 CFR rule beat that average time significantly, like by almost 30%.
that's because we were doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're in your capable hands. So to me, the estimate that I've been telling people is sometime between June and October is a reasonable estimate for when we could see things, but trying to tell specifically within that window is impossible based off waivers and this and that and everything. Is that?
It's impossible to tell, and it's not the CIO's responsibility to develop it.
Yeah, I'll take that as that's a great estimate. Yes. Like and subscribe, everybody. So let's talk about things that happen after the 48 CFR rule comes out between June and October. There are a lot of people who are like, okay, the 48 CFR rule comes out, the phased rollout begins, and then I have 12 whole months to get started because everything in phase 1 will be level 1 assessment, self-assessment, and level 2 self-assessment. However, the recent memo that came out says that level 2 C3PAO assessments are driven by the data type, not by the phase of the rollout. So should people be waiting and saying, well, we still have 12 whole months once the phased rollout begins, or will there be level 2 certification assessments in that first phase?
The phased rollout is best case scenario. The DoD does have discretion per the rule language to implement the level 2 certification requirements as they see fit to protect their data. So I would not plan on only the phased rollout, strict self-assessment timeline.
There you go. There you go. Let's talk about something else that's really popular, the T3 process. And why? Why?
Why?
Maybe tell people what that is in case they're not familiar,
So
right?
Tier 3 process is basically an equivalent background investigation for a secret clearance, but in the CMMC ecosystem, you don't get a secret clearance, you don't get anything, it's just an adjudication of your background. It's good for 10 years, and it allows you to be an assessor or part of the ecosystem. But it is a requirement based off of the need to protect CUI and the systems that store it. So,
And it's been a bit of a bottleneck.
it has been quite a bottleneck. The process that it entails is going through several different organizations within the DoD, and then coming back and then going through the CAICO. So all those processes take time.
So it is Matt's fault.
I am doing the absolute best I can to improve that process and make it more efficient and get things moving faster, but there's only so much within our control to satisfy the requirement.
So, I mean, is it at least something that it seems like there's a light at the end of the tunnel where that constraint starts to open up? I mean, obviously you guys know that this is, I love it every time there's a town hall because people go, did you know that the T3 process is a constraint? Like, everyone knows that it's a constraint.
Yes.
But I don't think anybody's heard from the DoD that there are actual plans to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, we're working on the best way possible to, in the beginning, we tried to look at alternatives to the Tier 3, but that was ultimately shot down. So
Because
there's the need to protect the CUI, and that is the baseline requirement for protection of
So
CUI.
if I could, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
We proposed a couple of years ago when we kind of saw this was going to be a bottleneck that you can really commercially get pretty rigorous background investigations. They're pretty on par with what you need for a CAC card, and we were willing to to assume that responsibility. And I will say to the PMO's defense, they were supportive of that. It was the security mafia within the Department of Defense that shot that down.
Exactly. So we tried.
yeah, I mean, this is something that I hear quite often is that, and I hopefully are amplifying with this conversation, that the AB and the PMO know that there are bottlenecks, anticipate that there are bottlenecks, and then through other factors that are outside of the control of those two organizations, we still get stuck with those bottlenecks, yet the blame still often falls on the program office, the AB, the KCO, and things like that.
That's what we're here for, to be the punching
Not here to say it's not all your fault, but there is extra context. I would recommend to the DoD to maybe explain some of those background reasons, because a lot of the angst comes, I think, from people who don't know that, hey, we tried this alternative and it didn't work for this reason, and people can sometimes get hung up on it. But let's talk about some of the challenges that we've seen, Matt. So a bunch of level 2 assessments have occurred. The JSVA assessment conversions have happened. From your guys' perspective at the AB, what have been some of the main challenges in the assessments overall, how it's rolling out within individual assessments? Like, what kind of trends have you guys been seeing with what people are struggling with the most?
So I don't know we have enough data for trends yet. So in general, we don't have full visibility in CMMC EMAS. We can see through some of it, but I think about 85, 88 maybe as of today, level 2 certification assessments or certificates of CMMC status have been granted, right? And this is post JSVA. So all the joint surveillance companies that went through that program with DIBCAC over the past couple of years, that data is being entered by DIBCAC, and I think those certificates are being generated, but I'm not including that in that 88 number. There have been, I think, 4 conditional level 2 certificates issued, and there's about 100 other assessments that have been logged in and started, right? So phase 1, the C3PO is uploading what's called the pre-assessment form into CMMC EMAS, and that essentially tells DoD that a level 2 certification assessment has commenced. Now, in some cases, I think the C3POs, we had some very eager OSCs within the DIB, and good for them. They're like, hey, I'm supporting the program. We've been working on this. We want to get certified. And then the C3PO in that phase 1 says, okay, you're not quite ready, so let's go ahead and stop here because it will be, we can clearly see based on your SSP or your scoping that you're not quite there. Go find help and call us when you're ready. And so some of those 100 or so that are in CMMC MES, I think, are some of those.
Okay.
And then some, I think, are just still in progress. So as time goes on, I think we'll have more data to share in terms of trends and any failure rates and all of that, but it's pretty much too early in the process. In terms of what I think are still issues that folks might be either misinterpreting or not fully understanding, I talked about that MSP, as the rule calls it, the ESP, the external service providers. I think the first point of emphasis that we would make is, the 32 CFR puts the burden on the OSA or the OSC to understand, is your external service provider a CSP or is it an ESP that's not a CSP? And I recognize that's an awkward term, and maybe we can work on that with the next round of rulemaking. Maybe. So, and depending on what the answer to that question, you're going down 2 different routes. You're either going down, yes, it's a CSP, and you need either FedRAMP authorization or FedRAMP moderate equivalency, and all that's encompassed there. And if it's an ESP that's not a CSP, then the requirements are different, right? And there are some misconceptions about what an ESP that's not a CSP, what your MSP or MSSP can do. They can't do it for you, right? The OSC's responsibility. It's their information systems being certified. And frankly, the DIB, heck, most companies couldn't really be successful nowadays without MSPs and MSSPs and CSPs. That's just the way the world works. There's no criticism that they exist, right? We just need to make sure that CMMC is clear enough to accommodate them so everyone understands if you're using an external service provider, you need to understand what they're doing for you, how they're doing it, what their responsibilities are, and that they have responsibilities per the rule as well. So it's not just, but they can't give you a pre-validated a CRM, a customer responsibility matrix, or a shared responsibility matrix. Every level 2 certification assessment is its own assessment. Mm-hmm. So if an MSP got through a level 2 with the CRM that made it through that assessment and that OSC got certified, they can't just take that and show it to their next customer and says, you're good to go. Here's our CRM, and it went through a level 2 last month, so you're good to go. That's not how it works.
Just flash your badge.
Right, because the assessor is going to see how are those 2 bodies, the OSC and the ESP, not a CSP, working to actually implement those security requirements. And it's not going to be copycat cookie cutter. So, your ESP that's not a CSP cannot give you all 110 security requirements. That's just not possible. They can't do the job for you, but they are critical partners in this, and so you need that first, that's at the top, that conversation you need to have first is with them, so you understand, and how they do it. And so I think we do have some cases, it's just a sense, I haven't kind of pulled the string, that we probably have some MSPs out there that if you actually pull the string on what they do, they're probably functioning as a CSP. So if you're storing, processing, or transmitting CUI as an MSP, you probably should take a look at exactly, those key elements of, whether software as a service, do you own the license? So we'll start looking at that closer to see if there are some MSPs out there that claiming that they're MSPs when they're actually functioning as a CSP. So there's a lot more understanding that needs to go on in that ESP bucket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure that the C3PAO panel after this will have some insights into what they're seeing as well. I'd just like to go back very quickly and make a recommendation to both of you. So there's about, you said maybe 88 or so companies that have their L2 status, and you said 4 conditional. So this would be people who had residual items on their POAM post-certification, which is a pretty great ratio, if you ask me. And then within this bubble of around 100 other, that we're not sure what they are, they maybe have started, we coined this phrase on the podcast called a false start, which would be a company that initiated their CMMC level 2 assessment, but didn't make it out of the pre-assessment review in phase 1 of the assessment. And I think that this is a very important metric for the DoD and the AB to track, because it would show us the number of companies that thought they were ready but weren't actually ready. They didn't fail the assessment. They literally could not qualify to begin the assessment because there wasn't enough raw material to work with. And that's different from failing an assessment. And I feel like a lot of companies underestimate the level of work. We've seen it very often where companies signed up for their assessment and didn't do the work, and then they didn't fail, they just didn't make it out of phase 1. And one of the criticisms that I've seen recently is people go, well, all the companies are passing. They're all passing their assessment. Everybody's passing with these high scores. Well, one, it's the early adopters, so they're more likely to be over ready for an assessment. But the way that the assessment system works is it biases towards companies that are able to pass, because if you're not likely to be ready for an assessment, you won't make it out of phase 1. So I think that tracking false starts would be very helpful for the ecosystem to know that if you're ready for the assessment, it's probably pretty likely that you'll make it all the way through. Yeah. So that's just something that maybe you guys can take back with you. About the T3 process, we were talking about this the other day. I know that there's a lot of people in the audience who are interested. What's going on internationally with reciprocity and CMMC and how that's going? We've been tracking the tail numbers of your flights and all of your international travel, so we know you've been out and about. But how's that going?
Reciprocity is not a term that
Terminology,
DoD
please. That's now a second.
Oh, here we go. I got 6 vowels I get to use.
Yeah, no reciprocity.
Okay.
Period.
No reciprocity.
As far as the T3s, though, that's another story. So within the security clearance process, we hold bilateral security agreements with a certain number of foreign nations.
Are you able to say who those are or no?
No.
Okay.
Basically, most of the list is classified. But the process that we're using now is that when a non-U.S. citizen that lives in a foreign country comes in to pass and become an assessor in the CMMC ecosystem, I can reach out to my counterpart in those countries and get that person cleared or check that they have a clearance in their home country. And that satisfies the Tier 3 requirement based off of the bilateral security agreement.
Okay, so the question that we get quite a bit is, okay, so there's no reciprocity, which I assume means that these countries will be standing up some form of their program, and then
They don't have to stand up their own program. They can work with...
It's an international program.
Yep.
I think the department structured this intentionally during the rulemaking process. Instead of having all these bilateral reciprocity agreements, which would be problematic in terms of not everyone's going to be on the same level. Let's open up the program internationally. So there's nothing precluding a company in Italy from becoming a C3PO.
Exactly.
Putting their Italian citizens through the CAICO certification process, going through our requirements, going through the DIBCAC assessment, getting a foci screen, which even U.S. companies have to do. All the requirements are the same. It has to be done in English, and you could have an Italian C3PO that would be eligible to not only conduct level 2 certification assessments for Italian companies within the DIB, but they could ostensibly do it for U.S. companies. So there's no, it's a free trade zone in CMMC once that maturity comes up. So I think you're seeing countries who are very energetic about being a part of this. We're seeing applications. I think on the town halls every now and then I'll put up all the numbers, but in the practitioner program we have a lot of international participation. We had our first Canadian C3PO apply recently, and I think we've got a few, three.
I've cleared. I can say this. I've cleared 3 international assessors through the Tier 3 process.
Okay.
And there's more in the pipeline.
Okay, so for companies that have work elsewhere, they would need to go through, I assume, the same process everybody else goes through, but perhaps with a C3PO based out of wherever they're at.
It might be easier, especially for on-prem evaluation.
Okay.
It might be easier to hire, but ultimately it's going to be an international compliance.
But that seems to be underway at this point. There's interest. There's people getting T3s. There's C3POs and things like that. So that seems to be growing. Yeah?
I think we're just at the very beginning of it.
Okay. So this was actually something that came up recently. We've heard it kind of whispered about in the past, but maybe we can clarify the misconception. This is all great, right? DFARS is nice. CMMC sounds really great, but I'd really rather not. And so I'm just going to go get an OTA. And because DFARS doesn't apply to OTAs, therefore I don't have to do any of this. Your thoughts, DoD?
Cybersecurity obligations are tied to the data and the need to protect that data, not the contractual vehicle.
Okay, so the way that we've phrased this, right, is that just because the FAR or the DFARS doesn't apply to OTAs, the security requirements still apply to the data that is being handled and processed.
The DoD has several DoD instructions, DoDs, 5248 and 858201, along with the CUI program mandates that require the protection of that CUI data, no matter what contractual vehicle they use.
I assume that, sorry for all the numbers, but 523024, Ryan Bonner, is that correct? Is that distribution statements? Yes? So that would still be like, so the linking, the connection here is the DoD instructions.
DoD instructions
just because the
still
FAR and the
apply.
DFARS clauses aren't around doesn't mean the DoD instructions don't apply?
Yep.
All right, there you go. Tell your friends, everybody. OTAs are not a workaround for your requirements. And I assume that the relevant instructions will be updated such that CMMC will also be sort of...
All those instructions are working on getting updated to include the CMMC language, the CMMC requirements, et cetera.
Okay, that's great news. Okay, let's talk about 171 Rev 3. For those of you that don't know, whether you love or hate the 171 Rev 3 ODPs, this is the man that is responsible for them. Why don't you tell us about the fun and wacky adventure that you had?
Fun and wacky adventure started about a year ago. So all the ODPs took about a year to develop from cradle to grave. And it wasn't just me picking them in a silo sitting at my desk.
Just spinning a big wheel every morning and picking one?
Funny story, Mr. McEwen actually made a joke. I know it's hard to believe. Someone at a Christmas party got a Ouija board game and no one wanted it, so he slapped a label on it that said ODP definition maker and put it on my desk.
Where's Dustin, the marketing? Can we get on? Can we make, you got this? Are you writing this down? Can we make one of those, please? That's hilarious.
But, in all seriousness, I went into this working off of the currently established ODPs that are in federal policy. So FedRAMP, CNSSI, 853, wherever they existed. And I pulled those from the Rev 5 853 baselines that exist in those publications. Mm-hmm. Working off of that, I worked with DCMA DIBCAC and then developed a larger working group of not just DoD, but federal agencies. So we had DHS, NASA, GSA, Who else was on
Those other guys?
Yeah, all those, NSA,
Okay.
all the relevant players that would be implementing this 171 through the FARC.
So this is not DoD going rogue?
No.
This is a pretty collaborative
This is a very collaborative effort that lasted months and months and months. Certain ODPs took longer than others, namely FIPS.
Whoa, let's not jump the gun here. Let's get the fun story out before we start yelling at you about that.
But over this process, we were able to work through every single ODP that was identified in Rev 3 and come to a consensus that said, hey, this is implementable within our agencies and throughout our industrial base.
When you do that process of working with people from the other agencies, do they ever joke about how you're going to get blamed for the things that you guys all agree on?
No.
No, they should. I'll bet
They should.
They should, because everybody's like, oh, why is DoD doing this? And in reality, it's like an entire collection.
Well, what's funny is the GSA and the DoD have a very great working relationship, and GSA has kind of taken the lead on the FAR CUI rule. So what they're doing is taking our lead, listening to us as we develop these ODPs, not just for 171 Rev 3, but for 172. So if you notice in the draft FAR CUI rule, the ODPs that they lay out for 172 exactly match the ones in the CMMC rule.
What do you know? Love it when a plan comes together.
know?
So everybody got your tomatoes and your heads of lettuce, correct? Why FIPS? Why is FIPS the
Why
ODP
FIPS?
for approved cryptography?
I spent about
You decided this individually. This is your
yes,
decision.
all my decision. No, I spent about 4 months just on FIPS, trying to find a solution that would satisfy the crypto requirements for CUI data, but was easier to implement and easier to manage for the DIB.
Sorry, if you could just say that one more time. Like you spent 4 months trying to find something other than
FIPS validated cryptography from the CMVP program.
But what happened?
After many, many working groups with not only the other federal agencies, but a lot of industry subject matter expert feedback, namely Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, a lot of their crypto experts were involved, brought in all of the current NSA crypto specialists, all the bigwigs from there, even got a guy named Dickie George, who is the godfather of NSA cryptology. But every conversation, every working group we had led back to nothing was as able to protect the data and as equipped as FIPS validated cryptography.
Fun. That's fun. Well, let's talk about, just to get off FIPS real quick, this is also something that might be relevant, because I'm sure you get this question a lot, Matt. The definition of a significant change within an environment within the ODP list is terrible. It doesn't say anything. What is a significant change? If anybody has the ODP list that you can pull up, at the bottom there's a footnote. It says, under a significant change, you would necessarily have to go through reassessments and things like this. What happened to this? Why is it so hard to say what a significant change is? Is this the committee process of
Lawyers.
It's lawyers. Is that the thing? Because this is really, I mean, it would really be helpful if we could get a better definition.
I had a longer definition presented, and
could that maybe fall off a truck one day and
sure.
we could just find it
Sure.
on the street?
Sure. It was one of those things that came down to it needs to be as broad and simplistic as possible.
Okay. Maybe take this one back with you. I'm sure people will agree with me here. We really could use a better definition of significant, but I would say based off what you're saying, we're probably not likely to get a different definition anytime soon.
Make a public comment when the ODPs are put into the next CMMC revision.
And that's a good point, is that the ODPs will be in the next.
So if you don't like something, make sure you comment on it.
FIPS. FIPS. We don't like that. So on that same idea, Matt, have other agencies reached out to you guys about what the AB is standing up here in terms of the assessment ecosystem? Is there interests from other agencies? Are they monitoring what you guys have going on?
Over the past few years, I've done briefings for OMB, for various other departments and agencies who I think, frankly, everyone's been watching the Department of Defense leading this charge, and okay, let's see how that goes. And I've said publicly, it would not surprise me that once we show everyone that, hey, this is actually, this model is effective, that you would see other departments and agencies, filing in.
Yeah.
The last administration's cybersecurity national strategy made it pretty clear that protecting the supply chain, using the leverage of government contracts, creating an industry common standard so that industry's not having to meet a DHS standard and a NASA standard and a DoD standard. I think everyone's in agreement of that. I think that conversation had been happening, and I think there's consensus now, so just a matter of time. Let's get the CMMC program matured, make that an example, and we're hopeful we'll see others follow through. But it's new administration, we'll have to see what they want to do there. Yeah. We built the ecosystem to support a multitude of departments in a multitude of countries. And so there might be certain particulars of how DoD implements that another department agency might not elect to do. And so they may call it a variant of CMMC, but the structure and the basics are there. 800-171, currently Rev 2, eventually at some point Rev 3. That's the important piece, what the standard is, and that's going to be a common standard for everything that I see.
Gotcha. Alrighty, well, the time has come to get to Daniel Anchorage's favorite question. So, FIPS encrypted data in the cloud. FedRAMP, no FedRAMP.
FIPS encrypted data in the cloud. I'm not going to say yes or no, but I'm leaning towards no.
Sorry.
So, Scott brought up a use case yesterday with the State Department. Mm-hmm. So, yes, the State Department does have a carve-out for CUI or protected data that is encrypted and able to be sent out without those extra FedRAMP protections. But what he missed was that there are actually other restrictions in place to protect that data, even if it is encrypted. So it's only allowed to be sent to certain countries. So none of the countries on the State Department's restricted list, to include Russia, are allowed to host or even receive that data, even in transit. Mm-hmm. It still has to be end-to-end encrypted. It still has to go to only authorized users. So while that example was one of trying to say that the encrypted data doesn't need as many protections, that's true, but it still has to have some protections because it is still able to be considered sensitive data.
Gotcha.
So unless the key that protects that data is completely destroyed, that's when you kind of cross the line into that's no longer sensitive data because there's no key to ever unlock it. But as long as that key exists, it's still potentially able to be opened.
Okay, so just because you encrypt it, it's not CUI Summer of Love here. We can't just stick it anywhere, right?
Can't just stick it in a public cloud.
All right. Okay. I'm sure there will be questions about this, but let's maybe wrap up here with the end of the time before Q&A. Level 3 assessments can only be done via DIBCAC.
They are.
When does that happen?
So,
has it happened yet?
Contrary to what Mr. McEwen tried to say at CMMC Day, there have been no level 3 assessments yet.
Okay.
DIBCAC is going through their final phase of training their assessors on their level 3 assessments, trying to get up to speed, make sure they have their ecosystem built out to conduct the level 3 assessments. And we are working with a select number of volunteer DIB companies to conduct mock assessments, essentially, non-attributional assessments on those companies later in the year so that we can test out and prove our training and processes for level 3.
So maybe early 2026-ish, first half of 2026 is when.
I'm not going to put a date on it, but
we're
working on the process.
It's 2026. That's what that means. So, don't worry.
Yeah. So we've got 2 level 3 assessments that we're going to be working on. One for an enclave solution, one for an enterprise solution.
Okay.
So we'll test those out and see where we go from there.
Okay, so let's do this last question, and then we'll get to Q&A. So if anybody wants to grab the mics or maybe raise your hand to queue up for the people walking around. What is this MSP marketplace that Mr. McEwen was talking about the other day? What's going on with that?
So MSP marketplace, prior to the new administration, we have been focusing on what can we do to help small businesses. What can we provide? Can we provide some kind of cloud solution, cloud environment? That has kind of led us to pivot and work with the cloud service providers to provide a more affordable solution or a somewhat cleared or validated solution that meets the CMMC requirements. So the DoD wouldn't be providing it, but they would be facilitating that relationship. And the marketplace that we're talking about, we've talked about with the AB, set it up similar to a FedRAMP style, similar to the AB marketplace, to put all those kind of pre-vetted CSPs, MSPs into one place that says, hey, here's the CRMs for these organizations, here are their certifications, here's what they provide, here's what they don't provide, and you can go pick from there.
Sounds awesome.
It's still in its infancy. We haven't really validated or established what all those requirements are going to be to go on that marketplace, but that's where we're trying to head.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like theoretically you could start to have requirements from primes or requirements in contracts start to show up maybe before that's fully up and running. So
we'll see.
For anybody out there that's like, I'm going to wait to see
I
what
wouldn't.
cool free offerings the DoD is going to provide, that may or may not happen before your requirements actually show up on your doorstep, right?
Yep.
So, okay, well, let's start with Q&A. We got about 15 minutes, and we'll take questions from the audience.
Do you ever see the FedRAMP moderate equivalent requirement for CSPs going away and just allowing them to possibly get CMMC Level 2 certified themselves?
No.
Sad.
I wrote the memo and I agree.
Long-time listener, this one's for Matt. So I noticed that the CAP doesn't have C3PAOs assessing for incident response in DFAR 7012. Was that overlooked? Was that intentional? Can you explain that a little bit?
So it was intentional. We can certainly adjust that, but the assessment for CMMC per the rule is 800-171, not the 7012 clause. The C3POs are not chartered to assess compliance with DFAR 7012. They are charged with assessing conformity to NIST 800-171 Rev 2. So it was intentional, and we would not be averse to changing it if the government's perspective on how that structure changes.
Quick public comment that I'd like to submit now. If the C3PAOs could assess the rest of DFAR 7012, it would be great. Specifically paragraph M, which is the flow down provision, because I think you'd find that there are a lot of companies out there who don't do that. And so you lose the ability to protect this data when companies don't flow things down. So, maybe just take that one back to the office and put it up on the board. If they could do things other than paragraph B,
Yep.
DFAR 7012, it would help a lot.
Okay, we got one from online, and we'll go back to the FedRAMP equivalency topic. Why is there FedRAMP equivalency?
Is that the question?
Why is there
why?
FedRAMP equivalency?
FedRAMP equivalency,
Why not
why?
just force them to get FedRAMP authorized?
That was an option. We put the lane. Well, I won't say we because I wasn't around when DFAR 7012
We'll blame
was
you
written.
anyways. It's
Federal equivalency was written into the DFAR 7012 at a time when FedRAMP program was in its infancy. So there was very limited cloud service offerings that were FedRAMP authorized. That environment has changed. There are now hundreds of cloud service offerings available on the FedRAMP marketplace. So that was a consideration, but in the meantime, we can't just update 7012 to delete the word equivalency. So, as much as the DoD would prefer to just mandate FedRAMP authorized cloud services offerings, that word equivalency still exists, and until that can be fully eliminated or find a workaround, equivalency had to be defined.
Restate that then?
Shoot.
So DoD would prefer to delete the word equivalency, but they can't just do that because it exists in 7012.
Yep.
But 7012 is going through a rewrite.
It is going through a rewrite, but the CIO is not responsible for rewriting it.
Does the CIO know who is responsible for rewriting it?
Does the CIO know their favorite box of chocolates? A nice candle in the office or something?
Yeah. So, we provide input to the organization that's rewriting those DFARS requirements, but Yeah.
Can you catch them in the parking lot on the way out of the day, like, and threaten them?
So one more piece on the equivalency part before we move on to the next question. So one of the challenges with the whole FedRAMP process is obviously getting a sponsor.
Yes.
Right? Is there a method for CSPs to more easily find sponsorship to get into the program? Because that is a huge hurdle, because there are many CSPs that service the DIB that do not service government agencies directly. And that is a huge problem for CSPs today.
And that will be a question for the FedRAMP director. But we have, worked with the FedRAMP PMO to kind of figure out ways to move forward, get those companies that are CSOs providing service to the DIB only onto the FedRAMP marketplace, and none of those have come to fruition.
As the FedRAMP director wasn't available today, we were actually going to have him rappel in from the rafters, like Sting in pro wrestling, and have you guys fight it out. But we couldn't make it work. Fun fact for people. Fun fact for people who don't know. You started your career in this part of the world as a contractor.
Yep.
Actually manning the inbox where people would theoretically request variances to 871. So I asked this question yesterday to the primes, but you were the person reading and shepherding these things.
Yep.
In your time, this is my own personal question, in your time watching this inbox, how many variance requests did you see, and how many actually sort of were successful?
So there was a period of time I wasn't monitoring it, but I was the DevOps person monitoring it from 2019 through 2023, and then a little bit of a break, and now they've started coming back to my desk. But overall, I think I've shepherded about 50 of them, approximately, over a 6-year period.
That's not very many.
It's not very many.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and then those are all approved. They're all of varying levels of quality. How does that work?
So varying levels of quality. Some of them.
We stomped the ground on this point, saying if you want to vary from the requirements, the process is to reach out to you guys per the language in the contracts. Not very many people do, but when they do, what happens?
The bulk of them don't need to be sent to us because they're requesting variances for controls that don't apply.
Okay.
So, there's a variance and then there's just not applicable, and people kind of misconstrue that.
Gotcha.
For those that were actual variance requests, most of them got denied.
How about I don't want to or this requirement expensive? How does that work?
Sorry, better luck next time.
There you go. Okay, there you go.
So my question is for James. Hey James. Is the DIBCAC planning to do kind of a similar mock assessment experience for 800-171 Rev 3? And then also, did I hear you correctly that all of the federal agencies got together and agreed on the ODPs?
Yep. Yep. So all the federal agencies that were involved came to an agreement, and they were reviewed all the way up to the SES level, so like a 2-3-star general level. And as far as the CMMC 171 mock assessments, that's kind of going to be a decision that we make with the C3POs and the AB, because DIBCAC's not going to do the 171 Rev 3 assessments out the gate.
Let's see. So maybe while we're waiting to queue another one up, Matt, you were saying there were some questions around the 10-day reevaluation period in the program and how that works. Maybe just explain what that process is and what some of the confusion is.
Yeah, that's part of what some of the feedback we're getting. 32 CFR provides for what's called a 10-day reevaluation period. And again, so much writing precision is so important, and I think that section was written in a way that could be misinterpreted and is occasionally. It is not, there's some conditions on when a security requirement, and security requirement has been determined to be not met, right? So if you have a security requirement that the C3PO says is not met, you have an opportunity to provide additional evidence within 10 days, and it can't affect any security requirement that's already been assessed, and it has to be done before the final findings are closed out. What it doesn't allow you to is to correct things, right? So what it should have said is additional existing evidence that can be presented. So maybe a key person wasn't around to satisfactorily answer the question that an assessor asked. They were on sick leave or something, or maybe you can't find a document. That's additional existing evidence. You can come back to the assessor and say, hey, when you assess this is not met, we didn't have everything here, we found it, or we got the right people. We would like you to reassess that requirement based on the additional evidence that I'm now showing you. It's not new evidence, it's not corrected evidence, it is not a window to fix things that, that were insufficient, that were not conforming. Now, assessors should and will, and maybe this is part of the cap that we can provide more guidance, there is assessor discretion. So what we're not talking about is in the course of assessing a security requirement, if you have a roster on access control and maybe someone was on there, it shouldn't have been, they left the company, or a new employee hadn't been added, or someone hadn't approved certain things that would be considered minor, the assessor can grant, okay, go ahead and fix that and then show it to me before I make a not met decision. That's a separate category. What we're talking about in that 10-day reevaluation period is once an assessor has determined that it's not met, you have 10 days if you have additional evidence that already exists to show them that might change that determination. It's not a window to go back and rewrite something or fix something or swap out software. That's not what it's for. And we will, through town halls and other fora, we'll try to make sure that everyone understands that.
Okay, we have one online. Unlike my phone again. When will certifications be issued to the companies who went through the JSVA process? And can someone explain why those who went through the JSVA are not being given 3 years from the date of the 32 CFR final rule, as was stated multiple times by DOD?
So I'll speak to, it is happening. So I think I've talked to some stakeholders this morning here where they saw the data come through, they're getting the certificate. So the joint surveillance program that ran from August of 2022 until December of 2024 allowed kind of early movers to go ahead and get what is essentially a DIBCAC high, but do it with a C3PO and DIBCAC, and that it would essentially be, that's the one reciprocity or standards acceptance that is in the rule.
Standards acceptance, there you go.
That would be equivalent to certification status. What it required was a DIBCAC to have to enter in all that data into CMMC EMAS, which was just recently stood up, and then EMAS had to send that to SPRS. And there was a whole, it's different to generate the certificate, it took a lot more steps because you were essentially retroactively entering in all that assessment data. That is ongoing, I think it's almost finished, and so a lot of those joint surveillance companies are getting their certificates now from the C3POs that participate in the joint surveillance. I think we always advertise in joint surveillance that the clock would start when that joint surveillance assessment was completed.
Yes.
And then that is also, I think, in the rule. So
I don't know where it was stated otherwise, but that is in the rule.
And we said that every time we talked about joint surveillance, at least in town halls. So sorry there was confusion.
So I've got a question for Matt. For the level 2 conditionally certified folks, did you notice any trend in their POAM items that they had left to close out?
We don't see that, and I hope as time goes on, we can get some of those trends, but I don't have any visibility into what was the case there.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're probably all 1-point controls because those are the only ones that are allowed
to be on the
POAM. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what they are over time.
So my question is about the EMAS form from an OOC perspective. So on the EMAS form, you asked to list the external service providers on that list. And you asked for their contact name as well. If the ESP is not part of your assessment, say they're providing additional support, the OSC is responsible for the security of the system, and that person is not sitting as part of the assessment itself, why do you need the contact information for that MSSP? So let's say it's an MSSP, for example. Secondarily, what are you doing with that information?
So the CMMC EMAS is a Department of Defense information network. The requirements of what goes in there are determined by the CMMC EMAS team. So I don't have any stake in being able to determine what data fields, why they were put in there, or what they're going to do with it. And you probably don't have visibility either.
Yeah, I am not privy to the CMMC
We can take that on board to try to get back to you.
So, I mean, if you send me that question, I will try and get you an answer.
Hi, good morning. If if you pass a JSVA and you've got your certification now, and things are working, you know, but like just this week they're working. So I just wanted to say that. But when it's time for reassessment, is there a window? You know, so if your assessment expires on a certain date, what's the window that you have to get assessment? Do you have to like be really forward thinking so that on the expiration date of your assessment, you're reassessed, or what's the time frame of that?
We were just talking about this yesterday, day before.
Yeah, I think that'll. I'm not going to speak for the government. That probably in the Title 48 rule, I would think, in terms of how the dates are interpreted for contract eligibility.
Yeah. But I believe in our session the other day, we were talking about...
That was for C3POs.
That was for 3CPO.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
There we go.
CPOs, yeah.
So we'll have to wait for the 48 CFR to kind of answer that question.
Okay, we're going to do one more online question, one more question here in the room, and then I think we'll wrap it up. Okay, so this is a fun one. Always probably one of the ones that you get asked at pretty much everywhere you go. Is the DoD doing anything to ease the cost burdens on small business for assessments or other costs associated?
Everybody look under your seats. There's a big fat check.
I will quote Mr. McEwen at CMMC Day. In the current climate, while we were looking for, you know, ways to support the small businesses with free services, free cloud service offerings, those are more than likely going to disappear as the funds get sequestered elsewhere. So like I was saying earlier, with the marketplace that we're putting together, that's going to be your next best option. We're working with those CSPs to get lower cost services set up for the DIB specifically. But outside of that, there probably will not be any other avenues for free services.
Good morning. This question is for Matt. You said it's too early for trends for data from the C3PAOs, but have there been any early things they're noticing or learning that they're reporting back?
Well, I think one is that there are a number of companies who just aren't ready. I think we really, I would say surprised, you know, not knowing who once is ready to go ahead and, you know, engage a C3PO for an assessment, but many of them just thought they knew what the requirements were and probably undershot that. And so, you know, we've got a practitioner program that has a lot of great companies and individuals who are there to help DIB companies understand the requirements. And I recognize, you know, we're going to be overhauling the practitioner training here in the back half of this year. We know there are improvements need to be made there. But at least when you go to the practitioner program, you're getting someone who is following the program, going to all the town halls, keeping up to date. You shouldn't go through CMMC alone. And I think that's what we're seeing is some companies kind of just did it internally and showed themselves with C3PO, and the C3PO said, you're not ready. That and then the confusion of the MSPs and that 10-day window is probably the top three items we're seeing.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys.
Yeah.
It's 10 o'clock, a nice clean hour.